Very warm welcome to this NIBA webinar on building resilience in a changing world, a conversation around mental health. Lots to unpack today, and we're absolutely delighted to have Damien Coates with us. I'll introduce Damien in a moment, and wanted to obviously thank Jill for their support in putting this together. Folks, really important conversation, but before we start off, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. As you probably know, NIBA does lots of events, many in person in the States, a number of very large national events, conference and roadshows, for example. But we've also increasingly been doing a lot of webinars. That's really to meet the member demand on topics that impact all of us, whether we're in the cities or the regions, whether on the East Coast or the West Coast, doesn't really matter. And we really appreciate your support for you joining today's webinar. So let me introduce Damien, and then I'll frame up how we're going to run today. I'm sure for many, Damien Coates is well known to you, but Damien has worked in the insurance sector for over 30 years. He founded Dual in Australia in 2004, and since then has overseen the growth of the business with 6 offices in Australia and New Zealand. Damien has been a public advocate for mental health for many years, participating in numerous cycling, running and adventure challenges to raise awareness and funds for mental health, and sharing, importantly, his lived experience with depression with tens of thousands of people. Damien's is passionate about breaking down stigmas and sharing clinically proven approach he uses his own life to support positive mental health. So Damien, huge welcome. Thank you for joining. Folks, Damien and I were also talking, and it's not many days since the very devastating and shocking loss of Tim Wedlock, a friend to many of us. So we just wanted to acknowledge Tim in this conversation. Perhaps in a discussion at the end of the webinar, Damien and I will just share a few Tim stories. And obviously loss and grief and things that turn up totally impact mental health. More on that later. Just in terms of how we'll run today, I'm going to hand over to Damien in just a moment. Before we do that, we have a poll question. How well do you think the insurance industry supports mental health? If you can just take a moment to complete that. And with that, I'm going to say, Damien, again, very warm welcome, and over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Richard. Are we? I'm just checking. Are we leaving this question on, or
the question's on, and we'll get a survey response in just a moment, which will pop up on the screen.
Okay, I'll just wait. Oh, there we are.
There it is. Yeah.
Through this, Richard.
Yeah. So 13% says we do it very well. 43% somewhat well. 23% not well at all. 0 not at all, and unsure about visibility. So yeah, thank you for completing that, folks. Damien, I'm not sure if you got an immediate response to that, or you want to weave it into the rest of your discussion.
No, I think, Richard, it's a good indication we're heading in the right direction. And I think I thank NIBA for having the foresight to, in an industry body, to be facilitating conversations about mental health. Really, to me, shows what a positive step our industry is taking to put mental health on the list of topics that we're talking about. And I'll take you through some reasons why I think that's so important. But I'm glad to see those results, that broadly as an industry we're taking steps. We can always do more, and I think today is one of those positive steps. So thank you. Thanks so much, Richard, for that kind introduction, and I'm really excited about being able to talk with you today, to share my experience with and journey with depression. I was first diagnosed with depression in 1999, and over the next 12, 13 years, I learned to put the pillars in place to be able to manage my mental health, to be able to be the best version of me for me. And I think that's the most important thing I would say about mental health, is you have to put yourself at the centre. You can't help others without being able to help yourself. And that learning to put the pillars in place to be able to manage my mental health was a really important journey, from which I then moved on to become, I guess, somewhat of a cheerleader for mental health. I got involved with the Black Dog Institute, raising funds, creating awareness, doing lots of charity events, as we'll share with you today, to break the stigmas down and start to create that topic that it's okay to not be okay, and a problem shared is a problem halved, and break those stigmas down around mental health. And then it moved on to sort of by 2018, I was asked by the chief professor of the Black Dog Institute, Dr. Helen Christensen, who said, Damien, we've got one more thing we'd like you to do for the Black Dog Institute. And I said, oh, what is it, Helen? You've had me, cycle from Adelaide to Darwin and Perth to Broome and jump out of aeroplanes and shave my head. What more could I do? I'll do anything. And she said, we'd like you to be you. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, we really think that if a CEO is prepared to be vulnerable and share with others their journey on depression, that it could have a really significant impact on others. And I guess it's breaking that stigma down that CEOs have power and money. But I'm here to share with you that depression and mental illness doesn't discriminate. It can impact all of us. And so I had to spend some time with my family, and really was I prepared to start to share my darkest moments with people to help others. And I sat down with Helen. I said, let's go through the exactly where we're at. And really, it was this slide here that gave me the courage to take the step forward, to be vulnerable, to talk to you today, because we're in a crisis. Okay, 1 in 5 Australians are experiencing mental health illness as we speak today. And that statistic, I speak all over the world, in all Western countries, the US, the UK, throughout, it is 1 in 5 globally. The next statistic that sits next to that, which is really frightening, is that over 60% of people experiencing mental health illness suffer in silence. They feel ashamed. They feel embarrassed. They feel a lack of support to put up their hand to say, I'm not doing well. And to that in itself, and we look at the fact that the leading cause of death in Australia of people aged 15 to 44 is suicide, that was a very confronting moment. And then it was looking at this probably at a macro level, and that the World Health Organization released a report that indicated that they believe that mental health illness by 2030 will have overtaken all physical illnesses globally. Cancer, heart attack, diabetes will all be dwarfed by mental illness. And that was really the clinching point that I thought, we have to stop now and take stock and start to tackle this problem. Because I truly believe the two greatest challenges society is facing is climate change and mental health. Okay, and therefore we need to be the generation that puts mental health away from the trajectory that it's currently on. And things that have sped up that trajectory are a lot of the areas we'll talk about today, but it has been sped further by the technology area, social media, climate change, and now AI is having a real impact. COVID, there is so many variables that have impact mental health, and we need to be able to equip to deal with change because change is that only constant. And making sure that we have a solid mental health framework to be able to support each other. And I love the theme today is about resilience. And to build resilience, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be able to have the courage and comfort and support and belief that if you put up your hand to say, I'm struggling, that you will be supported. You will not be shamed. You will not feel embarrassed. And we'll talk through a lot of that today. So as I say, I think, and I'll talk a lot about the next generation and our children and the challenges that they're facing with social media and time on device and cyberbullying and all of those facets. But we're living in very uncertain times. And, every generation has had to deal with the impact of recessions and cost of living pressures that we're experiencing now. Every generation has had to deal with geopolitical instability as we're dealing with now. But this generation is now dealing with these other challenges, the challenges associated with climate change and the fact that 50% of people who are exposed to a major weather event develop mental illness. the fact that we're looking at the impact of social media and time on device is correlated to a really strong, particularly on children, on the impact on mental health. And now probably, the latest real fear that is building in society is the fear of AI. And AI is a very unique one, and we'll talk about it a bit today. It is dealing with change. The only constant in life is change. But the facet of AI that is very interesting is we're dealing with change that is constantly changing. If we look at, there is views that the impact of AI could have the most significant impact. In fact, the Black Dog Institute has been working on research reports that it could be the biggest impact to society since electrification. Now, whether that is the case or whether we look at it against other major changes in society, the personal computer was a huge change. The internet was a huge change. But those changes, they came about over long 20-year periods with significant capital investments, and they were technology-driven change. Where what we're dealing with AI is change that is happening very quickly, and it can be cheap, and it's moving so quickly, and so we've got to make sure that we're putting in place the processes and support to be able to build that resilience to help us deal with this change. So we'll talk a bit about that through today. So as I shared with you my sort of journey before becoming an ambassador of the Black Dog Institute, of which Jewel donates 10% of my time to deliver these keynotes, to participate on boards and various industry groups, and also with the Black Dog Institute, to start to break the stigmas down and create awareness about mental health through sharing my lived experience. And as I said before that, I spent a lot of time road from Adelaide to Darwin, Perth to Broome, London to Barcelona. You can see here we shaved my head and raised funds and awareness. And I jumped out of an aeroplane, which I'll never do again. And it raised a lot of funds, but it's definitely not one for me. And from that, it's been able to break the stigmas down and create awareness about mental health. But I'm going to now talk about my own journey. And my own journey, as I said, I was first diagnosed with depression in 1999. And I learned over many years to be able to put the pillars in place to be able to manage my mental health to be the best version of me for me. And then I can support my children and my friends and the community like today. Number one is I'm a big believer in communication. Everything is about communication. There is nothing good kept in. A problem shared is a problem halved. We've really got to be able to get it out. Stuffing it down is not solving the problem. I had some challenges with my mum last week, and I woke up and I went, I've got to have the conversation. There's nothing good in keeping this in. So communication, whether it's seeing a psychologist, accessing an EAP, utilising your mental health first aid officers, there's a lot we will talk about communication. Number two is lifestyle, diet and exercise. It's scientifically proven the endorphins associated with exercise have a real impact on your mental health. Now, that doesn't mean having to cycle from Adelaide to Darwin. It's really a case of building exercise, whereas a walk in the morning with your dog is a key pillar of everything that you do. In terms of diet, we've seen the high sugar-based diets of our children is having a significant impact on mental health. Alcohol and substance abuse has a significant impact on our mental health. And we're in an industry that is exposed heavily to alcohol, and learning to be able to manage your diet and exercise and exposure to substance is something that is really important. And the third is medication. And medication is something that has become a really important part of my overall mental health plan. There's a lot of stigma associated with medication. It's not for everyone, but it is an important pillar that can form part of a mental health plan. There's also always other pillars that people as I've got to know along the journey. I spent a lot of time with Adam Goods, who also works with the Black Dog Institute. And during the end of his career, when he was exposed to that awful period, he really shared with me that the importance of sleep. And it's proven scientifically the impact of preparing for sleep, getting good quality sleep, particularly for for younger people, and managing that transition to sleep in terms of social media and time on device, has a really strong impact on your mental health. Another one that is really important is the easiest thing for us to do that many of us find the hardest, and that's breathing. Hyperventilation, over breathing, poor breathing can cause significant anxiety, panic attacks, and learning good breathing techniques, whether it's meditation or, in the case of me, if I'm feeling, stressed or anxious, I need to take a moment to focus on 3 deep breaths down and then count to 10 to slowly release. And quite often, having good breathing techniques can be an important part of managing your mental health. So, they're the pillars I'm going to talk about through my journey. I'm going to share with you my journey. I grew up on the northern beaches of Sydney, a normal, loving family. I'm the oldest of 3 kids. Footy, surfing, a really normal upbringing. My parents divorced when I was 12, but otherwise a really normal upbringing. And it was in 1999, you can see here, the Sydney Olympics, that I got the great opportunity to move to London with AIG, to work in the insurance industry, to work in Lloyd's, to see the world. And I was 6 weeks away from being about to take that journey, and I was at my mum's house, and I woke up one morning and I was crying uncontrollably, and I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't eat. I couldn't leave my bedroom. I didn't even attend my own farewell. And my mum, she panicked. She was from a generation that didn't really understand what was going on. So she took me to my GP, and my GP referred me to a psychologist. And over the next 6 weeks, I worked with that psychologist to be able to understand that there was significant grief that I'd experienced through growing up during my parents' marriage breakdown that I hadn't processed, and that role that I had taken as the protector of my 2 brothers from the conflict that was going on with my parents. They carried that through my 20s, and if my brothers got done with DUI, I was the fixer. I was there to protect everyone and make sure everyone was okay. And the feelings I was feeling was a sense of abandonment. I was feeling, how could I be so selfish to go overseas when everyone needs me? And through a psychologist, I was able to learn and process, and the cloud was able to and deal with those emotions. And that was my really first exposure. And I went to London, and unfortunately, 12 months later, I found that I'm actually there's 50% of people who experience mental illness that is associated with a traumatic event. The loss of a partner or something significant that happens in their life. But then in time, once they've processed it, they're able to move back to a base level of mental health and not be as exposed to depression. Unfortunately, the other 50% have a chemical imbalance in the brain that they will be susceptible to mental illness for the rest of their life. And I'm in that 50%. And at various times, my depression I've had to learn to manage as part of a long-term mental health plan. So I started to focus on seeing a psychologist, having those breaking down and having those conversations. I focused on diet and exercise. And it wasn't really, I came back and set up Jewel in 2004 and became a dad. And it wasn't really until 2012, 6th of December 2012, a day I won't forget, that I had been asked to become the global CEO of Jewel. And we were due to move to London, and we sold our house and the kids were enrolled in school. And the 6th of December, I went to see my brother. And he had 3 children. He just lost his job. He'd had a marriage breakdown. He'd run up hundreds of thousands of gambling debts. He was living in a commercial shed. And I caught up with him just before I was to go overseas, and he told me that he was looking to take his life. And I'll never forget that Christmas as we sat as a family and were worried about what was going to happen with my brother. And I rang David Howden the next day on Boxing Day and said, mate, we're in this situation. I can't take the risk of being 12,000 miles away and something happens to my brother. And David said, family first, we'll fix it. We'll figure it out. And so my brother moved in with us. He lived with us for 18 months. And I'm very pleased to say that he lives in Brisbane and has a functioning relationship and has a job and work and spends time with his kids. His journey with mental health was a different one. In the case of my brother, I'd take him to see psychologists, but he never really felt that. And I say that to people quite often. If you see a psychologist, it takes 2 or 3 before you'll find that level of comfort. But my brother was very good at communicating with my mum and I. And the key thing is communication, is it'll be different for everyone. Whether it's seeing a psychologist, if it works for you, try. But also if you don't, as long as you can find a way, there is nothing good kept in. You've got to find a way to get it out, whether it's to a professional or it's to your own support group. In the case of my brother, he was a heavy drinker, 6 beers, 2 bourbons, 7 days a week. And we had to make changes that were going to be sustainable. So in the case of my brother, we moved him to mid-strength beer. My brother drinks 3 mid-strength beers. And the thing is about making a long-term mental health plan is it has to be something that can be sustainable. And by removing heavy alcohol on a prolonged basis allowed him to start to be able to deal with the significant highs he'd get at 10 o'clock, but the very big lows. And by moving to sort of mid-strength alcohol and reducing quantity, he was able to work through that. And though my brother turned to medication and we saw some really strong impact on his mental health through medication, it was able to help him manage the significant highs and lows and sort of work through his issues. And I saw medication really have a strong impact. The next real experience that I had is that our family had with mental health, and a lot of mental health, it's important to know, is genetic. My mother suffers depression. I suffer depression. My brother suffers depression, and learning if it's in a family, it's something that you need to be able to work together. But I did something at the end of 2013 that I recommend no one does, and that is I didn't move to London, but I commuted to London. So for the next 18 months, I would spend 3 weeks in Sydney, 3 weeks in London. And this is before Teams and Zoom. Everything was face-to-face. And it had a significantly negative impact on my mental health. I was constantly exhausted. If I was in London, I thought I was failing my family. If I was here in Sydney, I thought I was failing my colleagues. And I was constantly exhausted. And I stopped seeing my psychologist. I was drinking too much, not exercising. And unfortunately, my mental health deteriorated to a point that I ended up in my apartment in London almost comatose. I wasn't able to leave the flat for 3 days. And that's when I really realised that I needed to make some significant changes. And I went back to focusing on seeing my psychologist and diet and exercise. And it was at that point in time I decided to explore medication that I saw had a really strong impact on my brother. And over the next 6 years, I had an incredibly complex relationship with medication, because I'd take the medication. For those who are aware, it takes 3 weeks for the medication to have an impact. And that is if you find the right course of medication. Quite often people need to try a couple of courses until they find a medication that works for them. For me, I'd take the medication and within 3 weeks, I'd be feeling great. And I'd get to 6 months and I go, well, I'm not taking tablets. That's for weak people. And I'd stop taking the medication, and within 3 months, the depression would be back. I'd start to take the medication, and within 6 months, I'm cured. That's for weak people. I'm not weak. And that went on for 6 years. And the impact it had on my family of me fighting with medication was only when I sat with my GP and my psychologist that they were able to help me explain that if someone has a blood pressure problem, they take a tablet every day to help them manage their blood pressure. If someone's is a diabetic, they may take an insulin injection every day. Well, if someone has a chemical imbalance in the brain that is causing mental illness, they can take a tablet. And I'd sit with my GP and my psychologist. And so I realised at that point in time, I was able to process that I need medication. And that at that, I made the decision that I take a tablet every day of my life, and I'll continue to take a tablet every day of my life, because I've realised that medication, along with communication and diet and exercise, is the whole framework that I need to have in place. So that was really my journey in terms of how, and hopefully sharing the examples of communication, diet and exercise and medication can really be part of an overall plan. I know this part of the presentation is often difficult for people, because the reason I really came forward was for not just the challenges that this generation, my kids, anyone who's on the phone who's a parent or aunt or uncle, the challenges this generation are facing are dwarfing anything. The challenges of climate change, the challenges of AI, but also the technology, social media, the impact of time on device. We are dealing with that. People aged 16 to 24, it's 40% of the population are experiencing mental health illness, compared to 20% for the general population. Suicide is the leading cause of death of all people aged 15 to 44. We're looking at the data and the statistics that have come in, the impact of COVID. And I'm talking to you at a moment that you can hear and it's the most question I'm asked by people is about how do I have the conversation with my children. I'm here to share with you, whilst it's scary and the fact that we're at a crisis on mental health, I'm talking to you with a real positive hope that I can share with you the journey of my 3 children, as you see in the picture here, that I've seen my 3 children, and this generation is really open to mental health. They want to talk about it. They want us to give them the courage and guidance and support to be able to be open and talk about how we're feeling. My 3 children all have seen psychologists at different times to deal with the trauma of their parents' breakup or relationships or the pressures at school. And this is a generation that is very open to spending time and talking and having communication. And it's not just with a psychologist. If I look at my son here, Finn, at the bottom, and I think back to one of his friends took his life at the age of 13, and I saw Finn and his friends in the next couple of years, they start going on a camping trip and where they would talk about this friend and check in with each other and what could they have done. And they now still do this camping trip every year. And they talk about that friend, but they also use it as a chance to check in with each other. And I'm really talking to you with hope that this is a generation that is looking to be guided, looking to be supported. And we need to be able to have and equipped to have these conversations. If you look at social media or time on device, and the technology era is not going anywhere. Social media is not going anywhere. It's saying that people can't have time on their iPhones. It's just not realistic. It's the way that this generation communicates. And there's a lot of work, if we look at and making sure that we're providing that support. When, a lot of us were growing up, if you had a bully in the playground, you would just go to a different part of the school, or very worse, you would change schools. But now on social media and the impact of the cyber trolling, you can have a young person being attacked by tens and 15s of thousands. And we've got to make sure we're providing support and guidance. And, the Black Dog Institute does a lot of work on the Future Proofing Study, which is a study of 6,000 children aged 7 to 13 that tracks over a 5-year period the impact of time on device on mental health. And it's having a really strong impact that more than 4 to 5 hours of time on device a day is having up to a 95% correlation to very poor mental health. So we've got to learn to be able to put those tools in place. If I look at social media, there's a lot of research that's been done that there's certain social media, such as Snapchat, which is a way this generation communicates in the way that we talk or text, or that is a way that they communicate. And so certain social media platforms have actually a positive impact on your mental health. Instagram and others which is very much about voyeurism and so forth, that can have a negative impact. And it's sort of all us learning about how we can support this next generation to make sure that we turn mental health back away from the trajectory that it's on and start to deal with it together. As I said, I've really loved the fact that I've been able to break the stigmas down, raise awareness, and from that we move to the next slide that we're able to. I'm very proud that we've been able to raise over 1.2 million for the Black Dog Institute. The Black Dog Institute, as many of you will know, is the reason I partnered with the Black Dog Institute was that there was a lot of great charities at the crisis end of Beyond Blue and Lifeline. But what the Black Dog Institute is the world-leading research to look at and try to understand how can we be more proactive in managing mental health. And the Black Dog Institute employs 300 clinical psychologists who are carrying the world-breaking research. But the Black Dog Institute, it costs around $60 million a year to run the Black Dog Institute. Less than 10% of their that comes from government funding. The majority comes from donations, and NIBA will be making a donation to the Black Dog Institute as part of me presenting to you today. I really thank everyone who's been able to help and make donations. Many brokerages I've presented to and law firms and many parts of the industry. In fact, a key part of that 1.2 million has come from our wonderful industry. And I speak to tens of thousands of people each year to try to break these stigmas down. So thank you so much for that, the support that we're doing and working together with the Black Dog Institute.
Thank you, Damien. That's an amazing conversation that you've just put in front of us, and I'm keen to unpack some of it. But folks, the second poll question is around building resilience. What do you see as the biggest barriers to accessing mental health support at work? If you can just have a crack at answering that question, we might just look at that together, Damien, when the results come through. Damien, just quick question. Black Dog Institute, is that an Australian institute or it's a global institute?
No, it's an Australian institute. It's the strongest global research organisation. Its research is respected throughout the world, but it was 100% set up in Australia, and is a charity we should be incredibly proud about for the research they carry out.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Kira, I'm not sure if the poll results are in. There you go.
There we are.
So there you go, Damien. Stigma or fear of judgment, 38%. Lack of awareness, 14%. Difficulty accessing. Any of that surprise you, or is that kind of congruent with other polls you've done?
Yeah, I think the stigma is exactly why we're having this conversation. I'm so thrilled that NIBA have got the foresight to have this conversation, because we are going to be breaking some of those stigmas down today. The lack of awareness and difficulty to access, again, hopefully in the next couple of slides, I'll be able to share some areas so that people can realise that there is a significant level of support. There is different ways you can access support so that you don't have to be in fear.
Thanks, Damien. Maybe we go to the next slide. I think you're going to pick up that thread, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, so what I wanted to do before we go to questions is to be able to share the mental health toolkit. Now, I'm a bloke, so I've got to keep things pretty simple. The traffic light system I get, green, orange and red. And really what we've got here is that support for people. And obviously every day we want to stay in the green. The green is that core pillars of mental health: communication, diet and exercise, meditation, mindfulness, breathing, sleep. We want to make sure that we build them into everything that we do, and we won't do them all right every day. The fact that I go one night, stayed out a bit late, I've had a couple of drinks, well, I've got to make sure the next day I focus on diet and exercise and doing all the right things. But broadly, we want to stay in the green, but we'll never always be in the green. There'll be times that we will move to the orange. And for many of us in the industry, grieving with what's the loss of Tim is a moment that we're dealing with significant trauma. But there is a lot of support there for moving to the orange. There'll be time you're in the orange. It could be 30th of June. It could be a relationship with a trauma. And there is a lot of help there. Most of the industry supports EAPs. EAPs are completely confidential. They're there to provide as part of a core pillar of employee support. They're completely anonymous. They're completely confidential. We'll talk a little bit about EAP. Mental health first aid officers are incredibly important, and particularly in Australia, the new health and safety laws have now put the onus on employers that they have to demonstrate they have the same level of support for mental health first aid as they do for physical first aid. And I'll take the moment to absolutely praise Gallagher's. Gallagher's have been leading this. Every single branch in Australia has both as many mental health first aid officers as there is physical first aid officers. And it's now something we're seeing on management liability. We're seeing claims activity because companies haven't been able to demonstrate they have mental health first aid officers. There's some great courses. I'm really proud 20 of our 200 people in Dual are qualified mental first aid officers. And through NIBA, I'm sure we can help share some of the great training organisations and can help you develop a mental health first aid program to support your physical first aid program. The government does some good work on the Medicare mental health plan. It was you were able to get access to 8 sessions with a psychologist during COVID. It's now 5. By seeing a GP, you can be referred to see a psychologist, and it will be picked up 5 sessions under Medicare, which is really important. But we know, and one of the real issues in mental health is the access to qualified mental health. Quite often we're seeing 6-month waiting list for seeing psychologists, and so what the Black Dog talks a lot about is blended healthcare, and that is that there is a lot of tools that are out there on the Black Dog website in terms of being accessed online support that can be used to support time with seeing by seeing a psychologist. So and quite often there's a lot of tools and surveys and other things that are able to you on the Black Dog Institute, that if it's too much to go see a psychologist, you can go and fill out some online information that will help you provide some guidance as to whether that you may be able to look to take a further step. So and then of course there will be times that we will move to the red. And it's so important that we all know and feel supported and love that there is help in the red, in that crisis space, and whether it's accessing your EAP, Lifeline, Beyond Blue, there is a lot of steps that people can take to move from that red back to the orange to the green. So please consider the mental health toolkit. If we move to the next slide, Cara, and we talk a bit here about EAPs, and they're there to provide support for all employees. Please contact your HR. And NIBA will be reinforcing these sessions today can have an impact on bringing some emotions out, and it's important that your HR team checks in with you to let you know that your EAP is there to provide support. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that an EAP is there to provide support much more beyond mental health. It's completely anonymous. It's able to be accessed not only by employees but their family. It provides access and support on anything from domestic violence to gambling, or even dealing with the bereavement that grief that people are feeling at the moment. So it's really important to know that there is help and support, and that was, to Richard's point, it's one of the key things that came out of the questions, is to make sure that people know that there is that level of support. Thank you so much for the opportunity today. Before I pass back to Richard, I just want to leave you with this final message, and that is, I truly believe that a problem shared is a problem halved, and that if you put up your hand to say you're struggling, that you will be supported and loved, and we can take this challenge of mental health and be able to support each other and leave the next generation in an even better place. I'm emotional seeing all the love hearts pop up on the screen, so thank you so much, and I'll pass back to Richard.
Damien, a few things to unpack. We'll go to the Tim grief and loss in a moment, but it strikes me from your story that the mental health journey is not linear. There are moments of time where you kind of need to jump into things and get sorted. Sometimes you didn't realise that, and then other times it's kind of plain sailing. Is that typically what happens?
Yeah, I think it's really, if as I said, 50% of people, they will experience mental illness associated with a traumatic event, and once that's been processed, they may not be exposed to it again. Unfortunately, I'm in the other 50% that it needs a long-term plan, and hence I've learned to be able to put the pillars in place. So it's something I'm going to have to learn to live with, and that's a really important point. And I've had times where recently, even dealing with some conflict with my relationship with my 22-year-old in the last 6 months, that I've had to go back to see my psychologist and help work me unpack and work through another chapter. So you're right, Richard, in many cases it's not linear, and it really is making sure that we take a long-term view to it.
Yeah, the other interesting thing is, as you say, we spend a lot of time on our physical health, particularly the current generation spend a lot of time in the gym, doing exercise. That's kind of the physical health stuff. And often we only think about the mental health side when there's an issue, right? Rather than a preemptive or a proactive plan. I guess that's a key part of your message as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And sadly, though, in a lot of aspects of the data and the analysis that the Black Dog's done, and part of the future proofing study is for a lot of young people, and particularly people aged sort of 6 to 12, they're not doing much exercise. Their time is on the device, and it's the fact that they're not getting that, and we've got to help them, put some guardrails up, because we recognise that time on device is really important, but they've got to make sure that they're getting that exposure to exercise So it really is, everything is linked, is I guess that message.
Yeah. Damien, let's just talk about Tim. And folks, there are some lovely questions coming through, so please feel free to ask. For those of you who don't know or didn't know Tim Wedlock, Tim was an owner, executive chair of AEI, part of the Austbrokers network. He was a long-term involved member of NIBA, served for many, many years on our boards, was our national president, co-founded the IYF initiative. He loved his rugby, and he was dead keen and in a huge community with Gordon Rugby Club, and then broadly all rugby. And of course, AEI was very big in the transport business, and there's a huge community in the transport business. But Damien, you've had a long relationship with Tim, and you awoke like I did to some very shocking news the week before last. Maybe you can tell us a Tim story, and then maybe we just unpack when grief and unexpected loss turns up. It does shock the system, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, Tim's someone that I've admired for 25 years of as that grassroots. He fell into insurance like so many of us and built an incredible business, was able to really become an advocate for the transport industry. But really, he was an advocate for our industry and getting people to enter our industry and understand that this is an industry that is a force for good, and it's an industry that you can build a great career and be able to constantly learn and be challenged. And the role, that's my absolute admiration for Tim, was the work he did with NIBA over 20 plus years, and his constant passion in that this is an amazing industry for people to join and nurture and be educated and developed. And his loss is something that of course, he was a great bloke, and he was a wonderful ambassador of rugby and a great guy to have a beer with. But I guess my big Tim story was the impact he had on so many people who joined this industry, and he was always there to talk and share the virtues of what a wonderful industry that we're in. And I think that'll be our role now, because we've lost someone very special to promote our industry, that we all need to step up and share what a wonderful industry it is.
Yeah. And, I was this Sunday morning a couple of weeks ago, and I just come out of the pool swimming at Manly here in Sydney with my son and his partner, and they're training for an Ironman. I was sitting in the sun, beautiful, absolutely stunning morning, and then the phone rang. It was former President Eric, who, and I looked at the phone. I went, I wonder why Eric's, like I was on a Sunday, but I wondered why Eric's calling me on a Sunday. I didn't leap to bad news. I just leapt to curiosity, and then he shared the devastating news that Tim had been involved in an accident in the US. And everyone I talked to who knew Tim well is still trying to come to terms with the loss and the grief and the processing. From your experience, how does that impact, particularly on mental health? Because you can't just go on with life and go, well, that's sad, but now the show goes on. How do you process stuff that's so big so that it doesn't, doesn't just get hidden, like you say?
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing is there's nothing good kept in, right? So communication and that conversation you had with Eric, and then the work that NIBA did, recognising every meeting last week. I think you shared with me that we spoke and took a moment to reflect on Tim. So I think, again, to mental health and what a society we are shaping up to be, that we're there to not just stuff it down and go, well, we've just got to move on, toughen up. Let's go and have a beer and everything will be sorted. We're actually stopping and talking about Tim and talking about the emotions that we're feeling. I think that's really important, but also to know that there is more support than just those conversations, and accessing your EAP could be a really important part to help you do the level of processing of the grief and the loss that's needed to be able to work through those emotions. So I think it's great that we're and here we are, a couple of middle-aged blokes talking about so openly the loss of a great mate. and that's wonderful, and we need to do as much of that. But for some of us, that may not be enough, and therefore knowing that an EAP is there to provide support, to see a professional to help you work through that process.
Yeah, thanks, Damien. Hey, I'm just gonna, if I can, I wanted to tap into social media or social media conversation, but just quickly into the insurance space. The workers' compensation numbers are massive, particularly around mental health claims and so on. We work closely with workers' compensation here in New South Wales, but equally all over the country, and those numbers totally bear out the black dog data around the rise, the massive rise, the explosion, if you will, on mental health claims as it pertains to work and the impact that has on people's lives, their livelihoods, their families, and so on. Any insights or observations from you in kind of with an insurance lens on how do we sort this?
Yeah, I think it was the recent review by the New South Wales government that ended up in implementing changes to workers' comp. I understand the basis of that and the fact that the prevalence of mental health claims are now double those of physical health claims, and the average cost of a mental health claim is 6 times that of a physical health claim. And so the government decided that steps had to be taken, and sadly, some of those steps was reduction and of the level of cover that was available under workers' comp. I think I understand why those steps had to be taken, and I know the insurance industry was involved in that consultation. But really, to me, that means we need to take other steps, and steps like today, and talking about EAPs and talking about mental health first aid officers and breaking some of these stigmas down, so we're more proactive to help manage the impact, because I'm aware there will be this reduction in cover that was needed to put in place has created a lot of fear, and so I think as employers we probably need to step up more and make sure that we're providing more proactive support through access to EAP, mental health first aid officers, conversations like today. And I think that probably NIBA taking the step of having me speak today is part of that overall, that the workers' comp is heavily impacted by mental health claims, and therefore what other steps can we take? So hopefully that.
Yeah, no, it's a topic that kind of permeates, obviously employment laws and regulations, but the impact that has right across the Australian community is just massive. Hey, I just wanted to pick up your theme, which I've had now personal experience on, and that's when you do go and seek help, it doesn't always turn out right the first time. Sometimes you've got to go and find someone who you get and they get you. Any thoughts on that, and any insights from your journey on that?
Yeah, no, a really good point, and I'm glad you're able to talk in your own experience, that it's so important, and it really is. You've got to find that rapport, that chemistry, and quite often it doesn't happen with the first person. But I really would give the encouragement that quite often it can take up to 2 to 3 professionals, and I've seen it with my own kids. Whether it's a gender or whether it's the type of person, it really is. If you're going to get that stuff out, which is the hardest stuff to get out, quite often it needs a professional. I really do say first and foremost that your friends and your support groups can only do so much, but there quite often is the need for a professional, and having the courage to take 1, 2, 3 steps, don't give up. It is really important that you can find that person that you can connect with to be able to help you get out what you need to get out.
And like you say, the Medicare is paying for what is it, 5 sessions?
Absolutely.
And more from my family experience, but it's been hugely valuable.
No, absolutely.
Just two quick other themes. So you mentioned COVID, and you mentioned the generation that spends their time on mobile phones and the rise of cyberbullying and so on. and again, having seen this, with two kids, and seeing it live as we paced through COVID, although I was living in New Zealand at the time. I mean, it was slow motion. I don't know what you'd call it, but it was such an intensely difficult time, not just the fear of COVID and therefore the fear of dying, which for a lot of people actually, for people in their wider circle translated, but then actually having to cope with having all of the normal things of life removed, things to look forward to, things to do, mates to hang with, school to go to, work to go to. I mean, that's still rippling, isn't it? The aftershocks of that are kind of rippling through really the global community.
No, absolutely. The long-term impact of COVID, particularly on young people, and that, my son completed his HSC in his bedroom, and those sort of things. And it was only 2 years later that we saw that impact in his case, and there was going to be so many examples, and we've got to be able to provide support to help people to be able to get it out of that, those feelings. And I know many parents and many people have felt that. In terms of the time on device, we've just got to understand to be able to have those conversations. And the conversation isn't just you can't be on your phone. It's about sort of having a conversation to go, well, just wanted to share with you that the Black Dogs research is showing that more than 5 hours on device is having a 95% impact on poor mental health. Like, what do you think about that? What are the steps you can take to manage it and really help your child be part of the solution? Because by presenting them with those sort of facts, it's sort of they're going to own it, yeah, and then they may come up with a plan for how they're going to manage that time on device. And I think that's really, and I talk to people, it can happen with children very, very, very young as well. The Black Dog has developed a great app called Sleep Ninja. And what it does is children watch it in the 15 minutes before going to bed, rather than being 15 minutes on social media or watching something on Netflix. They go and use Sleep Ninja to help them prepare for sleep. So it's just, there's so much tools out there, Richard, and it's wonderful that you've allowed us to facilitate this conversation today.
Yeah, look, last question, and I'm going to flick into the world of exercise and the green in your slide. My personal view of mental health, or my own mental health management plan, is riding bikes and going for runs and playing football and stand-up paddleboarding and so on. But it's being active and breathing and exercise and diet. You've done a huge amount of pretty massive trips and activities. What was your favourite? Was it riding from Perth to Broome or Barcelona to London? What was your fave?
It's a great question. I would say my favourite was riding from London to Barcelona. That was 2,500 kilometres. We led from our head office in just outside of Lloyd's, and we cycled down and took the ferry across, and then rode across the Pyrenees and up some of the great Tour de France stages, and then down into Spain and into Barcelona. So I'd have to say that was probably the most special one. But they've all been very special. Thank you.
Well, that sounds fantastic, and perhaps when you do it again, we can get a NIBA team going. We've got a NIBA team at the conference coming up on supporting Tour de Cure, and whatever your exercise passion is, it's fantastic. Folks, there's been a lot of lovely comments. I'm going to wrap at 3:56 and say to Damien, to Jewel, thank you once again for sharing your vulnerabilities and for sharing your story and giving us some very clear tips about what to think about, what to look out for, and as is coming through, a big virtual round of applause from all of us here at NIBA. We appreciate your insight and we appreciate your support. Folks, also a big thank you to all the delegates who tuned in today and stayed and hopefully learnt. We will have a little survey that will go out. Look, more broadly in the world of NIBA, we're on the runway to our big national conference. There'll be lots of conversations that are relevant for brokers at all ages and stages. But I think to Damien's point, the connectivity in this sector is such a hallmark of insurance, people building their lives together, their careers together, connecting together, which really is supportive. And as you heard Damien talk about the regard he has for Tim, that in its own way becomes a key part of keeping people's mental health plan well with love and friends and family and colleagues and so on. And so with that, Damien, a big thank you again, and to all of us here at NIBA, to everyone out there. Have a great afternoon, and look forward to catching up real soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you.